I'm going to spoil a lot of Resident Evil, but especially Code Veronica, the original Resident Evil 4, but bits of pretty much everything except for 7. Now, with that out of the way, welcome back, residents of evil. Biohazards? Boy, we really need to figure out a name for this 25th anniversary for our fandom. Anyway, you may have been able to tell that I have a bit of a soft spot for Resident Evil, and in times of stress, I return to these oldies as a place of comfort. It may sound a bit bizarre to some people finding a grisly, intentionally stressful horror game relaxing, and I wasn't always this broken as a human being, but it's my happy place nonetheless. Since the announcement of Resident Evil Village, I've been psyching myself up by replaying some classics and not-so-classics. While most of my focus has been on the beefy eldest brother of the clan, Resident Evil 4, I also felt compelled to hustle through arguably the worst entry in the whole series, Resident Evil Code Veronica. Now, there are certainly more reviled Resident Evil, and I've played Code Veronica more times than some of its younger siblings, like Zero and the Revelations games. However, this entry fascinates me, and pulls me back in every time to witness the ways in which it succeeds and fails. It's bizarre to see how slavishly devoted to the Resident Evil formula, PM, patent pending, that Capcom was, while also trying out odd and broken concepts that would be polished to a mirror shine by the time Resident Evil 4 came around. Code Veronica was first conceptualized as a true sequel to Resident Evil 2, yet it was released after Resident Evil 3, onto the already struggling Sega Dreamcast, early in the year 2000. 2 years later, Capcom published a gorgeous remake of the first Resident Evil game, and a peculiar prequel, Resident Evil 0, on the GameCube. Then, years after that, we finally got the much ballyhooed Resident Evil 4, and our world changed forever. By all measures, Code Veronica was the struggling middle child, torn between two worlds. The low-resolution, low-budget world of the original 3 PlayStation titles, and the daunting future of the GameCube's more polished Resident Evils, and beyond. From here, I'm going to try to look at maybe most of the things Capcom was retreading from its earlier games. Then we're going to point out all the things that stood out as new at the time, that gave us peeks at where the series was heading just a few short years later. From there, I want to talk about why it's an awful, terrible, trash, garbage game. And finally, I need to end on a positive note by pointing out all the reasons I still love it to this day. So, up first, what did Capcom recycle from its past to save some development time and, of course, keep the fans happy? Well, it might have been easier to start out with what wasn't reused, but, I mean, you heard my roadmap a second ago. I can't change that. That's set in stone. However, we can just zip through it with a little montage.
Resident Evil. Resident Evil. Resident Evil. The American Midwestern town, Raccoon City.
Bizarre murder cases have recently occurred in Raccoon City.
It was Raccoon City's last chance.
No, I'm Claire. Claire Redfield. There's a gun inside.
Better take it with you.
Still in one piece.
Oh, Jill.
Here, let me give you this in return. You might need it later on.
Jill, here's a lockpick. It might be handy if you, the master of unlocking, take it with you.
Sorry about that little misunderstanding.
but I thought you were another one of those Relax, beautiful. I said I was sorry.
Ooh. Sorry about that, babe. I ain't got no clue, darling. But don't you worry, girlie. You'll be safe again.
I don't want you following me, lady.
Now go.
Just go.
It can't be helped. Let's search for him separately.
Thought I wouldn't make it.
What happened?
Barry, help me, please. The door won't open.
Hurry! That was too close. You were almost a Jill sandwich.
Perfect.
Ouch! There is serum.
Claire?
I think I've been poisoned.
Just hold on. I'll be right back.
Am I poisoned? Damn it, give me serum.
I'm sure the serum must be there.
I know. It's a lot. I spent dozens of hours cobbling that together, and it barely scratches the surface. Even the most original or out there Resident Evil spin-offs recycle a lot, and this was plainly not their most daring departure from the series. That, of course, brings us to the things Capcom was foreshadowing in this title. We got a lot of cool previews of things to come that we really couldn't appreciate back when it first came out. We, of course, got a prototype Ramon Salazar with the whiny introduction of
Alfred Ashford!
King and Queen of the Campy Laugh. We also curiously introduced a very specific off-screen character arc. Previously, we'd gotten little hints of Umbrella employees or contractors slowly realizing that, hey, maybe working for this evil company making ungodly monsters was a bad idea, with little snippets of diaries or letters left behind. This time, however, we got a proud butler who was dragged into evil machinations through his connections with the Ashford family who he served. We can see this in his diary here. Please forgive me, as I must tell you of my abrupt departure by leaving this letter. I first served your father, Lord Alexander. You were forced to become the master of the family at a very young age, and nearly lost your sanity from the sorrow of having lost all of your family members at once. I first thought that I should kill myself to apologize. I then realized that it would be an insult to our dear Lord Alexander and Alexia in the other world. Whoa there, buddy. Talk about being married to the job. This is an extremely specific character arc, repeated in the Salazar Castle, which was written about in these letters here. I have no idea as to what the Lord is planning, but Senor Salazar was just being used. It is too late now, however. Senor Salazar has already taken the plaga into his body. Nevertheless, there's nothing I can do about it. I have served the Salazar family for generations. I am prepared to continue my services until the very end. So yeah, that butler should have taken a hint from Alfred's butler and pieced out before he became, extra entangled. We also got some hints of what they were working on with Remake and RE0, which were in pre-production or development by the time Code Veronica released. While we didn't get a true partner system like in Resident Evil 0, it's obvious they were considering it by looking at where they included Steve as some sort of partner, the couple of times he hangs out with Claire and clears a path for her. They also included dual-wielding weapons and much zippier action scenes, allowing Claire to live out her John Woo fantasies in gameplay and beyond. We wouldn't get more dual handguns until Resident Evil 6 came around, but those guns broadly represent a trend in the transformation of RE protagonists from awkward, helpless tanks into leaping, kicking, knife-fighting action heroes. This is also the first game since the original to confirm that Albert Wesker was alive and scheming, which would culminate in the most insane scenes of Resident Evil 5. And honestly, this is probably the last time Wesker would seem like a cool, incredible threat. In this game, he's got super strength and speed, and a bunch of bioweapons on hand to just throw at Chris whenever he feels like it. This is a step up from RE0, where he just schemes in the background, but it's not quite as over-the-top as his teleporting shoujo villain appearance in Resident Evil 5. It certainly helps that this game didn't end with Chris and Claire blowing Wesker up inside an active volcano. Most curiously, we also got our first hint that Capcom wanted to introduce actual aiming mechanics into the mainline series. Yes, we'd technically already experienced first-person aiming with RE Gun Survivor, which was a combination light gun / survival horror hybrid that almost no one actually played, and yes, the devs had originally conceived Resident Evil 1 as a first-person shooter, but scrapped that plan in favor of pre-rendered backgrounds. But the inclusion of a gun that required first-person aiming, along with a boss that made that weapon count, was a significant hint that the devs were looking to spice up the boss fight experience in the way that every other game wound up doing, by making you aim for big glowy weak points. Unfortunately, as you can see, they also decided to make it impossible to aim from more than a few feet away during the fight, so this fight itself wasn't the significant improvement that we would eventually see in RE4 and beyond. As we've seen, this game comes off less like a sequel and more like an iteration or a love letter of the first three games. Like Resident Evil 3, it lacks a character select but requires the player to occasionally switch off between two player characters. It also focuses a lot of its attention on the lore of the Umbrella Corporation.
The Ashford family is among the world's first and finest. My grandfather is one of the original founders of Umbrella Inc.
And trotting the player characters through nefarious puzzle house after nefarious puzzle house, like the first two games. It certainly doesn't shy away from the campiness of the first couple games.
Welcome, Claire!
But it's learned the lessons of 2 and especially 3 by allowing its characters to rip off the creator's favorite action movie heroes instead of sticking exclusively to riffing on the B-movie horror genre. Unfortunately, it also still has a lot of the series' weaknesses baked right in with its nostalgia trip. These are the points that make it kind of the embarrassing stepchild of the series. First of all, it spends so much time saying, "Remember this?" that even hardcore fans would find it a bit too on the nose. Did we need this half-assed clone of the Spencer Mansion? Did the series really need to keep annoying flying enemies around to waste your bullets on? And, inescapably, did the bosses really need to suck so bad? Resident Evil bosses before RE4 are all sort of the same. You can understand why. How do you make an interesting fight when your character can only sort of wiggle around a room, stopping occasionally to stand stock still and pump off 1 or 2 shots, before wiggling away again? The answer they eventually discovered with the birth of RE4 was to create a completely different kind of game. So, in the meantime, they were stuck with old school bosses. And what makes old school RE bosses tough? Limited mobility and limited ammo. The bosses in this game are almost unbearably difficult. The first time you fight the Tyrant, you literally just have to have enough powerful ammo on you to kill him, or you just can't proceed down this narrow hallway. The second time you fight him, you're in a cramped cargo plane, trying to push him out the back by doing enough damage to him. They give you a little more space for the Nosferatu fight, but add in a random wind that pushes poison gas at you from across the entire platform. There's basically no joy to be found in fighting these bosses. And that's a shame, because the atmosphere and storytelling in this game is far better than any previous entry. You get to explore a creepy prison island overrun by zombies, but teeming with environmental and direct exposition, showing you just how sadistic and depraved the inhabitants were. There's torture chambers, creepy incest vibe twins, a fucking mini-sub for no goddamn reason, and even an exciting take on the series' trademark backtracking. This time around, when the game walks you back through the previous zones, the maps feel completely different because they are. When you explore as Claire, sure, some things are on fire, but they're mostly intact. When Chris comes back, whole areas are blocked off or crumbling to pieces as you explore them. There's a whole hidden lab that Claire missed, just beyond a waterway. The big open area in the Antarctic that Claire flooded becomes a legit chunk of ice you get to fight a giant spider on top of. And can I just gush about Alfred Alexia for a minute here? Alfred is the peak campy horror villain. He's faux British aristocracy and Norman Bates rolled up together and hopped up on cocaine.
Must be.
What? No!
Wait a second. What just happened?
He lives in a creepy murder castle with a giant fucking hanging doll hanging in the center of it. He imitates his supposedly dead sister basically for fun. And that laugh, my god, that laugh, it is burned into my brain and hasn't left me since I was 12 years old.
Now you will see what real terror is all about!
Claire's deadpan responses really shine through when she's put up against Canadian idiot Steve and maniacal madman Alfred.
What? Shut up! Make one wrong move and I'll shoot. Oh? You must be one of Umbrella's lower level officers if you're in command of a backwater base like this one.
How dare you!
And I think that's almost entirely the reason people are still calling for a remake of this game. This is the game that transformed Claire from...
I came to find my brother Chris. Look, I'm sorry I bothered you, okay? Just don't come any closer. Are you listening? Wait! Don't shoot!
Get down!
into I'm here to kick zombie ass and chew bubblegum. And a lot of it is thanks to her appropriately wussy supporting cast. Sure, they tried to jam a Steve love story down our throats, but thankfully that petered out with his transformation into the Jolly Green Giant. And yes, Chris eventually comes to save her from her damseling in distress, but those parts of the game are such an afterthought to the majority of the experience, which is Claire running around gunning down biohazard after biohazard in new environments, while also teaching Steve the value of caring about people.
This thing is a lot more reliable than any person.
Then people?
And teaching Alfred that he's a kooky dirtbag. This is Claire's game, and I won't hear otherwise. But most of the reason I still love and return to this game is, paradoxically, Because it's a bit of an unfocused mess, like all of the original games to some extent, there's a charm and joy in playing these exploration-based games, being baffled by their item placement and design choices, and then pushing on and learning their quirks and conquering them, despite their aimlessness. This last playthrough, I spent nearly 20 hours just fumbling around, re-experiencing the mad randomness of it all, and replaying portions repeatedly when I realized, for example, that you can start Chris off with every weapon Claire's found if you plan correctly. Compared to the first 3 Resident Evils with their relatively tight maps and story progression, Code Veronica feels like the last, most sprawling gasp of the original game's design. Now, don't get me wrong, I love Resident Evil 4, but by the time it came out, I was also in love with the clunky, slow-burn tension of planning out my scarce item slots and going without weapons to try to speed things up. RE4 changed everything, with its dynamic scaling difficulty, fast-paced aiming action, and huge, sprawling, but mostly linear maps. I still enjoyed the hell out of Remake and RE0 too, but this game right here represents the last moment when I believed the Resident Evil series could go on being what I'd known basically forever. This was the inflection point, the final flicker of my childhood naivete.
Shut up! I don't want to talk about it!
Steve.
So that's why I returned to it. I don't know that I'd recommend it to someone, but it's a part of me. And it's a part I miss and love coming back to. Deep down in my heart, there will always be a cackling, devilish Alfred Ashford begging me to stroll through his murder castle and enjoy his drag show. And goddammit, I'm gonna keep showing up and stuffing singles in his bra, enjoying the spectacle every time. Thank you so much for coming on my little rambling exploration of this weird, weird game. And I hope you enjoyed it. It took me, oh god, way longer than it should have. And that's because combing through all this gameplay footage takes forever. Recording all this gameplay footage takes forever. Everything but Resident Evil 5 I went back and recorded myself. I guess maybe Gun Survivor 2, I don't have access to that. But it was a joy getting to play them, to record these, and really focusing on these details and what happened in them. So I'm glad you were here to experience my hard work, and I hope this gets you pumped up and ready for yet another evolution of the Resident Evil franchise next month with Resident Evil Village, which is going to be a hell of a ride. So I'll see you when that game's out.